Here we are on Monday of Holy Week, and I think our gospel gives us a really good image to help us place ourselves and get ready for this week to kind of see, on Monday of Holy Week, where should I be? So the gospel today that St. John gives us is a delight to our imagination. So imagine with me for a moment the scene that St. John gives to us. Even some elements might be a little bit hard just because we can't be with our families and friends due to the current circumstances. But nevertheless, encourage you to open up your imagination to God and see what it would have been like for Jesus and those around him at that time. We hear that for them, it's 6 days before the feast of Passover. Similar to us for Easter. This means that the Jews and even non-Jews all over the region are making their way to Jerusalem for this feast. They're flooding the city. There's lots of commotion, lots of people. They're all around buying and selling goods in the marketplace. There's a lot of excitement because it's a great time of community. People are meeting with family and friends. They're gathering together, catching up, and they're sharing their lives with one another. So John tells us that Jesus, for his part, is with his disciples, and they're in a smaller town that's roughly 2 miles away from Jerusalem, and they're in the home of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. So these friends of Jesus. So Jesus and his disciples, they're away from the commotion in the city of Jerusalem. But I'm sure that Bethany, because it's so close to Jerusalem, is also experiencing an increase in the number of people, more people gathering in marketplaces and everything there as well. So when we look to Jesus in this scene that St. John gives us, we see that he's there with his disciples. He's with Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, and they're preparing to share a meal together. So they're in this intimate setting of sharing a meal, kind of catching up, being with each other. So I imagine, because Jesus is there and present to them and the Passover feast is drawing near, that there's this great peace in their home. So the last time that Jesus was there to visit them, the circumstances were different. It was much more a time of sorrow and grief because Lazarus had died. So people had gathered to their home for that sorrowful occasion of the death of Lazarus. And Jesus, for his part, he was delayed, and by the time that he showed up, that Lazarus was already 4 days in the tomb. So now they are here in their home, all of them, Martha, Mary, Lazarus, and they're all enjoying one another's company. So now just kind of look through each of them and some of the character growth that we see from the Gospels. So for Martha's part, St. John tells us just a simple line, and Martha served. So in these words, now again in the presence of Jesus, I imagine Martha to be at great peace. She's there, she's serving Jesus, and she's learned how to make her service a type of prayer. If you remember from St. Luke's Gospel, we hear another occasion where Jesus was at their home, and at that time we hear that Martha was burdened with much serving. And there, Mary was just contemplating at the feet of Jesus. So as Martha, feels the weight of this burden, Jesus speaks these words kind of into that place of pain for Martha. Jesus says to her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her." So at this story from St. Luke, we heard that Martha was burdened with much suffering, And so now, John and his words, they're so simple, and Martha served. So at these simple words, I just imagine Martha to have this great interior peace as she allowed Jesus on that previous occasion to speak into the depth of her heart, to speak into her pain, and she received Jesus' word. So Martha, she let that counsel of Jesus really enter in and heal that inner unrest. So Jesus' words were welcomed by Martha into her heart, and they took effect and brought about this great peace, allowed her to serve with a sense of greater peace rather than burden and anxiousness. So now, when we take a look at Lazarus, we know that he was the one who was placed in the tomb, but now we see that he's reclining at table, he's alive, right next to Jesus. He's enjoying his friendship with Jesus, and Lazarus, he knows, he's heard the story, he knows that he is loved. He knows that he is loved by Jesus, because when Jesus came, like Jesus wept at his death. And now they're together preparing to share this meal, and they're sharing in the friendship that they have with one another. For Mary, she was the one who had contemplated at the feet of Jesus. And now I'm sure she's drawn deeper into her ability to contemplate the truths, to contemplate the meaning of current events. And now we see that she is called into action. And as part of the action that she does, she chooses to take this ointment that is normally used for burial. So now she has this insight to anoint the feet of Jesus with this burial ointment. So at this moment, here in this peaceful home, it's now filled with the fragrance of this costly perfume that's made from genuine aromatic nard. So this home that has experienced death and then resuscitation as Lazarus was brought back to life is now filled with a fragrance that once again anticipates death. But perhaps, on this occasion, with that certain sense of peace and seeing Lazarus being resuscitated, and Martha knowing that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, now perhaps there's a sense that this aroma, this fragrance, also anticipates the resurrection of Jesus. But we also know that as beautiful and as nice smelling as this fragrance would have been, that it also has a different effect on different people, given their ability to kind of take in that fragrance. So we see when we look to Judas, that Judas responds much differently. Rather than seeing the beauty of this gesture, when the fragrance reaches his nose, there's a certain bitterness and disquietude that comes out of Judas, out of his heart. He's upset. He's not at peace. John tells us that Judas would rather have had that perfume sold. And we know that Judas at the time said for the sake of the poor, but we know now looking back that it was also because of his love for money, his love of self and his own pursuits, pursuing his own interests, that all of these things blocked him from seeing the goodness of that gesture, the goodness of that moment. So Judas, for his part, as he prepares for the Passover feast, he is not at peace. He is, because, in a sense, he's not at peace because he hasn't fully given himself to Jesus. There's a part of his heart, a part of his life that he has kept hidden from Jesus. So he would steal the contributions from the group and indulge in his own interests rather than sharing, rather than seeing that he has a role, that he has a place among brothers, among friends. So lastly, as more and more people become aware that Jesus is in Bethany, that he's in the home of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, we hear that a crowd gathers. And as the crowd gathers, there's chief priests and scribes that gather there as well. And we see the disquietude of their hearts as they see the crowds gathering to see Jesus and to see Lazarus. So for them, rather than seeing the beauty of Lazarus being resuscitated by Jesus, that Jesus has the power over death, it turns their hearts bitter. It turns their hearts to that jealousy. And so now, instead of seeing the beauty of that moment, they instead plot to kill Lazarus. So only God could raise someone from the dead, and rather than rejoicing and seeing God's action in their midst, they plot to kill Lazarus because they could see that many Jews were turning away and believing in Jesus because Lazarus was now alive. So the only thing that Lazarus was guilty of was that he was the one who was chosen by God to be brought back to life in this way. So here we see how the unrest and disquietude of their hearts gets amplified by what they see. So the chief priests and the scribes, they don't think logically. And as we consider those at peace in this gospel account today, and those at unrest, we see that it is Jesus that brings this peace. Not only Jesus, but remaining in this friendship with him and not holding these parts of our lives back from Jesus. So I give you these questions to just kind of think about. Where are you on this Monday of Holy Week? So to what extent do you befriend Jesus? How much of your lives do you share with him? Do you let Jesus speak into the areas of unrest in your life? Does his word have a welcome place in your hearts? Do you seek his counsel? So if Jesus could only act on what you have told him, would Jesus know enough to speak those healing words into your life, to speak those words that open up your hearts and help you to find that healing in him? So today, we follow the example of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, who have loved Jesus, and they've invited him completely into their home, into their struggles. They share that meal, they share the moments of that day with Jesus. So we allow Jesus to walk with us too, through trials and difficulties of life, that we may experience the peace and joy of having Jesus being a part of our lives.